Hello, and now I'd like to welcome our first guest here at the Sports Credential Podcast, Andrew Allegretta. He is the director of radio broadcasting at Vanderbilt University, and is the voice of Vanderbilt baseball and football. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me here as our first ever guest at the Sports Credential Podcast.
Wow. Happy to. By the way, and look, this is my world, but very cool series on some of the sports broadcasters in town. More specifically, Kevin and Jeff Hem and Mike Keith and all of that sort of stuff. That's very cool.
Yeah, we love the Nashville Voices series. Trying to get back into that with this summer coming up and things kind of lightening up in the sports world here in Nashville. But yeah, I've loved that series. Getting to talk to you, getting to talk to Jeff Hem, getting to talk to Mike Keith was really awesome, and everyone's been really cool. All the broadcasters are fantastic in town, and I think Nashville kind of sometimes gets overlooked as a sports town, and maybe not the teams, but the personnel. You look at some of the people, even just since like 2000, the people that have been working in Nashville sports, both in the radio side, both in the communication side. There's just so many legendary people, from like Pete Weber to a Mike Keith to everyone at Vanderbilt that's been kind of building up the program. People even at the colleges with Belmont, TSU, you see people have been part of this kind of Nashville sports world for decades, and it's awesome to get to cover that, and it's awesome to get people like you on here to finally get a guest on the podcast to talk about kind of Nashville sports, and specifically like to dive into some Vanderbilt baseball today.
Yeah.
But for first off, for people who are not familiar with your journey to Vanderbilt, tell us a little bit how you got to Vanderbilt and exactly what your position is as director of radio broadcasting.
First off, if you're Pete Weber and Terry Crisp and you've got what amounts to a bar named after you inside Bridgestone, I think you've done fine.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Those guys are the best. So very hyper brief synopsis. Previously, before coming to Vanderbilt, I was at Tulane for a couple of seasons. Basically the voice of the Tulane Green Wave, doing their football, men's basketball, and baseball games on the radio. Before that, I spent 8 years at Virginia Tech, doing women's basketball games as well as baseball games on the radio, plus a lot of that ACC Network Extra stuff, which is the equivalent of the SEC Network Plus. So for the better part of my time since graduating from Syracuse in 2010, I've been working in collegiate sports in some form of fashion, calling games. As far as my role specifically with director of broadcasting, radio broadcasting here at Vanderbilt, yeah, you're talking about it. Calls the football games on the radio with Norman Jordan, call the baseball games, sometimes with Kevin Ingram. That's kind of just how we've split it up. And I'll do the SEC Network Plus stuff for men's and women's basketball here, plus a lot of like silly ancillary stuff that, has to do with interviewing sponsors for radio broadcasts. We've got a podcast that we try to talk to some Vanderbilt people and put that out periodically. We've got the Commodore Hour that airs every Monday night. So a lot of that kind of shoulder programming stuff as well. So that's kind of the as rapid fire as I can do it synopsis of everything.
So let's dive into I'd like to dive right into Vandy baseball this season. Obviously Vanderbilt baseball has kind of been the forefront sport of Vanderbilt for at least a decade. Obviously basketball is getting back on track with Jerry Stackhouse's amazing season. And even Clark Lea, I mean, the record may have not showed it, but that football team was fantastic last year and they have a bright future. But Vandy baseball has always been in the forefront. From last season going into this season, what were your expectations, and how have they kind of grown or kind of depleted, or how have you seen the season go from your view in the booth?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I had any specific expectations. I think we knew coming into the season that the pitching staff should be pretty good. How good? I don't know. I think we knew the defense would be pretty good. How good? I don't know. And I think we knew that the offense was going to need to evolve somehow, because you lost basically your two best hitters from a runs production standpoint between Dominic Keegan and Spencer Jones. So the offense has been really good this season. I know we're coming off a couple of weeks that have been struggles. Some of that, I think there's stuff worth delving into. Some of that's baseball. Um, but in terms of expectations, I don't know what I thought they were. I think the season has been very, very good for this team. I mean, we're sitting here talking on a Tuesday before we play MTSU, and your second place SEC East, if you at least win one game this weekend versus Arkansas, you guarantee yourself a top 4 spot at the SEC tournament, which means you don't have to play on Tuesday. You're sitting there in really good position, having a great season. Now, the caveat to that is I think most Vanderbilt fans know that the way Tim Corbin, not in totality, but first and foremost, is going to grade things out about how well can you play in May and June. So, if for some reason we make a regional and get bounced, I don't think it means the season was a disaster. But I know from Coach Corbin's perspective, he's going to want to accelerate toward the finish line. So where that goes, I don't know. But we've positioned ourselves to be at least a regional host here at the Hawk. And then I think if we can play well versus Arkansas and then go down to Hoover, we can be a top 8 national seed. And then after that, it's all styles, it's all matchups, and it's all the quirks of baseball over the course of a regional or a super.
Yeah, and like you said, these last couple weeks, struggles against Alabama. Very interesting situation down in Alabama on top of that, right before Vanderbilt went into Tuscaloosa. And then yeah. And then this past weekend in Gainesville. What did you see on the field that wasn't connecting, that was starting off, that we saw in the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season? Because we saw Vanderbilt bounce back against after a tough sweep against Tennessee in Knoxville. What have you seen this past week that hasn't really been able to bounce back that you saw after that Tennessee series?
Well, I would start with the fact that Florida's really good.
Yeah.
Not to take the cop out, and I say this like delicately, I think from a talent standpoint, I think Florida's the best team in the country.
Okay.
Don't disagree with you there. Vanderbilt's elite, but Florida's got some special people on that roster. And it's a very, very deep and talented roster. They also played about as well as they've played throughout the course of the season. So I don't know how much we aided that versus them kind of having the puzzle pieces come together. Florida, like most teams, is way better at home. And so is Arkansas, for what it's worth, and they've got to come here. And so is Vanderbilt throughout the course of the season. There's kind of been some interesting road versus home splits in the conference this season. Coach Corbin sort of attributed that to just the fact that, man, these environments have gotten so tough with the way the facilities have been built up, the way that the energy around the games has grown over the years. So I don't know if that's everything. Some of it is the fact that our pitching staff has gotten dinged up. If you're a team that has built its identity on pitching and defense, which this program has, and certainly this version of Vanderbilt has as well, if you take one or two of those key pieces out of the rotation, I don't care. You can take Paul Skeens and Ty Floyd or whoever out of the rotation for LSU. They're a different ball club. You could say that about everybody in the conference. So not necessarily trying to make excuses. I think they feel like they probably should have performed better at Florida. The offense has to settle down. I don't at all pretend to know the challenges of trying to hit a 98-mile-per-hour fastball with ride on it at the top of the zone. I can't do that. But these guys are unsettled at the moment. Part of it is the pitching staffs that we're going up against. I mean, you alluded to the fact that it was an interesting situation at Alabama. And I don't mean to put thoughts into Luke Holman's head, but that's the guy that threw on Thursday night for Alabama versus us. And he was the guy that was scratched before the LSU game that led allegedly to the bet being placed with knowledge from Brad Bohannon. Reportedly.
Yes.
He pitched to me like he was mad that he's been in a newspaper article for a week. So we've come up against a couple of interesting circumstances. This team offensively kind of has been streaky's not the right word, but it's an offense that needs to land a couple of punches before it starts to spin its wheels. And we just have not been able to land a few punches. And then the longer that you go without landing a punch, the tighter you grip a bat. So everybody kind of just needs to take a deep collective breath, which is hard to do when people are throwing hellacious stuff at you, which is what you get when you go up against Florida and Arkansas and the rest of this league. But trying to compartmentalize and just get back to the fact that you're all still pretty good hitters, they'll be fine.
I want to touch on a point that you brought up before about the facilities and kind of the environments getting so tough for Vanderbilt baseball. And it seems everyone talks about SEC football, and obviously SEC football is king, and it's always going to be, it's been king. But man, SEC baseball is a completely different animal that people who are not familiar with collegiate baseball don't know the traditions, don't know, how impactful they are to the school and how unbelievable these games are and these teams are. I mean, you look at the rankings all season, the top teams have always been SEC teams, and it's been like that for a while. What's it been like from your point of view these last couple of years, seeing SEC baseball right up front and being able to watch these players and call these games?
Well, I would say this. At one point in time, and this was a couple of years ago, so the data is probably out of whack, but of the college baseball programs that make money, like they're all in the Southeastern Conference, with the exception of like maybe a couple, like Florida State down at the ACC level. They can pack that place. Maybe Clemson out of the ACC. Those Pac-12 schools are very, very good, but I from a making money standpoint, it's different in this league. I mean, heck, we went to Arkansas last year and some dude was holding up a raccoon in the middle of a ball game because he pulled it out of the seats or something. They're the tailgating at South Carolina is great. We punched Mississippi State in the teeth 26-3, and those fans showed up the next day in droves. It's different, and I love it. Like, as someone that covered ACC baseball for 8 years and saw some good environments, like Florida State again is good, Clemson is good, NC State can be good. Virginia Tech throughout the years got better with the stadium renovation, but nothing even comes close to the environments, the intensity, the passion, the skill set of the SEC. I've talked to some coaches that go from lower levels up to the SEC. When they're down at the SEC, they're down at the lower levels. They're like, I can't believe that, the 11th ranked team in the SEC made the NCAA tournament. And then they get to the SEC and they go, yeah, of course the 11th ranked team in the SEC made the NCAA tournament. Of course they did. And I love it. I mean, as Coach Corbin says all of the time, that's why you play in this league. And I don't want to speak for other schools, but certainly some of the schools in the SEC, I would think their fans show the intensity higher for baseball than even men's basketball at times. And it's not universally true, but there are for sure some schools in the conference, I would suspect, where the passion raises above men's basketball depending on the season. Like LSU comes to mind immediately.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there's probably some others, like Arkansas comes to mind immediately. And by the way, Arkansas men's basketball is huge. I mean, did they win the final? Did they win it in '94? Like, or they made the final? So. Yeah. Well, I know Jerry Stackhouse played against them in the semifinal game. I just can't remember if they won it in '94, but I think they did. Anyway, their basketball program's great, and their baseball fans are bonkers. So to me, it's awesome. I love every bit of it.
Yeah, I had a couple friends that went to Ole Miss, and
that would be another. Yeah,
basketball's not really on their radar, but baseball, he always said like, football's religion and baseball's life, and I'm just like, okay, wow, just how insane those baseball fans, and like we saw last year in the tournament, Ole Miss didn't have a great regular season, but they came up and they won it all. It's one of the most interesting, I think it's the most fun baseball conference, and there's a lot of great baseball programs out there, like out west, and we've seen Michigan and a couple other programs come out and play well, but consistently it feels like the SEC is always putting out some of the best products
You
baseball
know,
wise.
it's funny you mentioned Michigan. I told Coach Corbin this piece of trivia. There have not been a ton of Major League Baseball Hall of Famers that have played college baseball in comparison to the totality of the hall.
Yeah.
Like 54, something like that.
Oh wow,
And
I
then
didn't know that was that
yeah,
low.
it's fairly low. And the school that has produced the most is Michigan with 3. Um, Minnesota has 2, a handful of schools have 2. I think like Columbia has 2 because uh Roger Maris or Lou Gehrig went there, one of the
Lou
2.
Gehrig did. He went to Columbia. I know that
All
for a
right.
fact.
There you go. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit. Like the
Yeah.
Southeastern now some of the schools have lost a few of their Hall of Famers through the steroid era. Like, USC would have produced more, but Mark McGuire is not getting in.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. Or Arizona State would have produced more, but Barry Bonds isn't getting in. So that's kind of interesting. But for sure, and I think Vanderbilt fans are kind of like that too. We just have, I mean, it's a smaller school, so we have a smaller alumni base, but the passion and the intensity are like the baseball is life, football is king, baseball is life. I don't think Vanderbilt's that far from that mentality. We're not going to have 20,000 people be able to make the trek to Omaha because we just have a smaller alumni base.
I would say in my experience over the last couple years, being in Nashville and going to games, I mean, some of the ticket prices for Vanderbilt baseball, you can't get into Vanderbilt baseball games sometimes.
I know it's all season tickets. We're like in the weeds here, but that's one of the like push and pulls for us is we have such a passionate baseball fan base that we can sell the place out through season tickets, which is good from a revenue generation standpoint. It makes it tricky from an accessibility standpoint. So I mean, I'm not the director of ticketing, nor would I have any idea of how to kind of split that in terms of generating the most revenue while also making it accessible. That's a really, 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 really tricky thing to do. But it is a really interesting, like the tickets for the Tennessee series last year were
They were higher
crazy.
than the Final Four. They
Yeah,
were
that's
higher.
right.
I remember seeing that. And, obviously there's issue with season tickets and people like scalping. I'm not going to get into that. But I think that just says, how much people are baseball crazy. Even in Nashville, people are baseball crazy, even though there isn't the pro sports and there's all that debate and all that stuff about MLB team. But how much, people care about baseball, both at Vanderbilt and in Nashville and also in the SEC, that people would pay a pretty penny to go see a collegiate baseball game.
I
It's
love it.
wild. No, I
I
love it
love it.
too. It's
It's great.
fantastic. It's
It's
so
great.
much fun. And,
Yeah.
obviously the Vandy Whistler. So that's obviously a great. I know every time I've gone to a Vandy baseball game, some people hate them, some people like them. I'm kind of like, it is what it is. I'm just going to accept the experience as it is. I'm not going to pick a side at all. But Vanderbilt, I know from my experience, Vanderbilt maybe not having a huge fan base compared to other SEC schools, that going to baseball games, there is a community that rallies around the baseball team. There is a dedicated fan base, like we saw this season with RJ Shrek, kind of
Yeah.
like the personality that grew around
Those
him.
masks made it out to Columbia, Missouri, man. Where I think
That's
our
amazing.
fan base is just as passionate. It's
Oh.
just smaller by proximity of having a smaller alumni base. It's just and we talk about Vandy baseball having been around. It's 20 years. So some of that built-in fan base that's lived through the quote unquote glory days of men's basketball, you're still talking about 50 years of history with that versus 20. So we're still, I provided that we continue to excel, I would still consider baseball kind of in the growth period of its fan base. I mean, I hope so anyway. Again, it's 20 years worth of history, not 50 or 100, whatever it is, of success for some collegiate football programs or whatever.
No, absolutely. And Vanderbilt's always had, at least in these last couple of years, from when I've been paying attention, I've been watching the players with certain personalities and certain, favoritism around certain players, the way the fans kind of attach. So talk to me about kind of the RJ Shrek masks and his popularity growing. I mean, his stats are insane right now. He's averaging 335, 179 at bats. It's got 54 RBIs. He's playing fantastic. On base is 473, leading the team. So obviously he's a good player, but there is that kind of hype around him with the fans and the masks. So talk to me about viewing kind of a growth that, how should I say this? Viewing players getting hyped up and becoming fan favorites from your perspective as just a play-by-play guy.
I mean, it's fun to watch. Again, the fact that Shrek Mass would make the trip to pretty much wherever we've gone throughout the course of the season is awesome. I've talked to him a little bit about it. Naturally, he's heard everything from his Duke days to his high school days to the Vanderbilt days. So I don't think you can really slip a Shrek line past him that he hasn't heard before. But he's cool with it. Like he's I think really supportive of the fan base that wants to embrace him as the new guy, which is awesome. I've talked about it from a statistical standpoint. He fits in with any Corbin era hitter. A couple of seasons that are obviously outliers would be JJ Bleday's 27 home runs. I think Pedro Alvarez had 22. But kind of the number that a lot of the really good hitters hit was 15 home runs. Like Dansby Swanson had 15 home runs in a season. Xander Wheel's done that before. Rhett Wiseman's done that before. Carter Young hit 16 in a season. Dom Keegan hit 15 in a season. RJ's at 13. I would hunch by the time the season's over, he picks up 2 more. He is statistically as good as any one of the Corbin era hitters, with the possible exception of JJ Bleday's 2019 season. And Pedro Alvarez and some of the kind of the gaudy either RBI or batting average numbers that a few guys put up. But he's been really, really fun to watch, and it's been fun to see a graduate transfer impact a team like that, because it's not something that typically has been done for Vanderbilt over the past couple of years. And it was a perfect storm of a guy that fit in for any number of reasons. I've told this story a couple of times. Right before the COVID shutdown in 2022, Coach Corbin was out in Los Angeles, California, trying to recruit a commit to come to Vanderbilt instead of turning pro, Pete Crow Armstrong, who did ultimately go pro. But one of the things the family said is the most competitive person that Pete had ever played with was RJ Shrek. They played on the same high school team together.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there's that. And of course, RJ played with Sam Leboki in high school. And of course, he came here in 2019 with Duke. So it's kind of like the stars aligned, where Coach had heard a lot of things about RJ Shrek over the years, and the right moment came together. So that's fantastic. But to see someone step in, it's not like Vanderbilt has never gotten transfers. Javi Vaz was a transfer. You can pluck out transfers. But to have an offensive player step in like that, right in the middle of the lineup, basically all season's been really, really fun to watch.
And talk to me a little bit about I feel like the Maldonado brothers have really kind of grown a little bit in like fan favorites, and it's been really fun to see them kind of grow both as individual players, but also kind of being like this really it's fun brother duo on the team.
Yeah, that's another one of those, like, COVID was a miserable thing, but if you try to scrape the bottom of the barrel for silver linings, situations like that are it. Because of Nick's opportunity to come back again, having gone through the COVID season, and then the coaching change at Clemson, from Monty Lee to Eric Bakich, opened the door for Chris Maldonado to decommit if he wanted to. And he did. I mean, the stars aligned for those guys to play together. I think they really appreciate it. It kind of always was a thing for that family that everybody needs to step out and do their own thing. The oldest sister played softball at Notre Dame. The second oldest sibling, Frank, played baseball at Pittsburgh. And then there's Nick, and then there's Chris. So they all kind of, forged their own path. But an opportunity like this was too good to pass up. And Coach Corbin has so much respect for that family. It's you see it with fathers and sons, I guess. There's a handful of situations. Jim Boeheim was coaching his sons in college basketball there for a little bit. That's not unusual. And brothers play together, so it's not the most unusual thing in the world. But you definitely appreciate it when the moments come together, because sometimes they don't. Like, it's entirely plausible that one sibling is capable of excelling at the SEC level and one sibling's not. So the fact that both of them can, and the opportunity came together to do it, is, man, you just feel good for good people.
So I'd like to transition into talking a little bit about the Vandy United campaign, which has just been, from my perspective, just unbelievable to watch. How the money, the growth, the construction, just everything coming from it. It's almost like a Vanderbilt Renaissance, really. What has that been like from your perspective, both watching the construction and seeing the news and kind of being part of this new era for Vanderbilt?
It certainly was not the reason that I came to Vanderbilt. There's a lot of reasons that I came to Vanderbilt. But having that as a backdrop is a huge selling point. And I think you probably don't get some people like Clark Lea to come to Vanderbilt without it. Um, you know, it's really interesting. I guess just because I've learned so much about the history of um, moving the athletic department forward over several decades, um, and the feelings that people have had around it, which obviously there's a lot of bruises there, which I get and I understand very much so. Um, and it's been interesting to go through some of the renovations, and basically people don't think it's happening. And again, I get why that would be the immediate reaction. I very much get it. Uh, but what we've seen over the past handful of months, now that we've literally turned the south end zone into rubble, and you can see right through the football stadium these days, I kind of always thought that that would be a moment where people start to understand what's going on. And by the way, just because we build a new football stadium or put up a new basketball practice facility or whatever, it doesn't guarantee us anything. It just means that we're in this fight. Um, and we sure are. I mean, Candace Lee has done a remarkable job. And, you know, the fact that we're able to do this doesn't really happen without the green light from Chancellor Deermeyer. And I don't mean to like gush over people that are above the employment structure from me, right? But I've been around college athletics enough um, to know that whatever you want to do, like really big stuff, typically doesn't happen unless you get the green light from the president or the chancellor or the board of trust or the board of visitors or whatever. I mean, it's the same thing with the Titans Stadium. Like, you've got to go through some really significant people, so on and so forth, however you want to frame that, to get the green light on stuff. Um, and there's business and leverage in the Titans thing. I get it. Um, but yeah, whatever we're trying to do with the football stadium, the basketball stadium, renovating the football facilities, it doesn't happen without the green light of Chancellor Deermeyer. Um, and the fact that he's willing to give the green light when, as I understand it, a lot of chancellors in Vanderbilt's past were far less eager to do so. I mean, that's a pretty bold step for him, and to have the right person with Candace, and I mean, it goes down. Like, I kind of feel like there's a lot of people internally that are doing really good work that would kind of buck the external narrative about how much Vanderbilt cares about athletics. I mean, I recognize that I'm in it and I know these people and I see them day to day, but that's my feeling. Um, right down the list from, Tommy McClellan, our deputy AD for external affairs, whether it's Mark Carter, who directs our NCC. I mean, there's too many people to list off. I mean, we're not a perfect organization. Nobody is, right? Like, everybody has good days and bad days. But I think there's a lot of people in this building on a day-to-day basis that are really well intentioned and have also been given the green light by their superiors to step into new spaces or re-engage spaces that we should have been engaged with previously. Like there's a lot of kind of nonsense words in there, but an example would be the Commodore Caravan that we've just got finished with. Like, that's something that a lot of schools do. And we don't always have to be like the most innovative person in the room. Sometimes we want to do it our way, as well we should, but it is important for us to occupy spaces that we should be occupying, meaning that all of the times that we ask fans to come to us, we should go back out there and go to them whenever we can, whether that's Houston, Memphis, Atlanta, Chicago, whatever it happens to be. We should do those things. So I think there's a lot of people, again, internally that are working really, really hard to kind of buck the external narrative and do right by our fans and do right by our student athletes and our coaches.
No, I completely agree. I mean, from my perspective, and not to take shots at anyone in the past or make any assumptions, but being a college football fan for many years and seeing like, wow, why does Vanderbilt, like, their sports never really do anything? I mean, baseball's doing good, men's basketball's had their moments, women's basketball's had their moments, but football, they've never been able to get anything going. And I've always heard the terms that, oh, they're not committed to sports, they're not committed to sports. But under uh Candace Lee, it just, and the chancellor, it really has seen it. I've seen it. Witnessed it as someone, even as a non-media member, just being someone on the outside, seeing the commitment of athletics and how much good it can do for the university. And it's been really, really fun to see, especially because it feels like in this Nashville sports world over these last couple of years, everyone's been getting a bite of something. The soccer team, the soccer fans have gotten their people. Belmont, brand new facility, practice facility. Their basketball programs have been blowing up over the last decade or so. The Preds are always on top. They always have something new going on. They're hosting something. The Titans now with their stadium and hosting the draft, and it feels like everyone's been getting a bite of something, but Vanderbilt hasn't really had that moment yet, and it feels like this is their moment to say, hey, we're also Nashville. We also have Nashville sports teams. Hey, we also really care about it, and this is what we're doing, and everyone should start paying attention. And it really has seemed like the sports have been kind of following suit with the campaign. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about the football team.
Sure.
I mean, they look really good last year in certain games, showing up against Florida, showing up against Kentucky. Just being able to get those wins and kind of build off of that and kind of create that foundation for the program in the future. What was it like watching that team and picking up those wins when everyone thought they were going to finish dead last with one win again or something like that? Being able to see them picking up those really fun and competent wins.
I think the line to start the season was like 2.5 wins, right?
Yeah,
Something like that. So. It might have been 1.5. I don't know. It certainly wasn't 3.5. I'm thrilled for the work that Clark has put in to be able to get the moment versus Kentucky, to get the moment versus Florida, to get to 5 wins. It's interesting watching it. First off, just the moment versus Kentucky, I know meant a lot to them because they had done so much hard work. You could feel it on a daily basis at the practice. And you could kind of see all of that hard work come out in one moment versus Kentucky. You could see it on their faces after the game. Like, sometimes we chuckle about teams looking like they've won the Super Bowl in relatively insignificant moments, but that meant a lot to them. I mean, it's a lot to carry the weight of was it 26, 27 game SEC losing streak, something like that. It's a lot to carry that, and to get that off of their shoulders was really important. The next piece of it that's really interesting to me is the way Clark thinks is a little bit like the way Coach Corbin thinks. I think he is respectful of what 5 and 7 means to Vanderbilt football. But to your point, the thing that has been missing for Vanderbilt is sustained success, however you want to define that, whether that's bowl games, whether that's, who knows, right? 10-win seasons or whatever. He's going to define everything about reaching really high levels. So he's respectful for the fact that 5 and 7 is a significant step up the ladder. But he's not ducked the intention of going to a bowl game this year. And that's, I mean, I don't know that he would ever say this, but to an extent, that's brave. Um, because if you don't, you have given critics ammunition. But I don't think he's afraid of that, which is awesome. And I think Vanderbilt football is a program that needs someone to be explicit with its goals, because the assumption is, as we talk about external narratives versus internal narratives, the assumption is there are no goals, which is not true. There is very clearly a goal for this program to reach high levels, however you want to define that. So I'm so intrigued and captivated, and I'm not sure if like in awe is the right word, or just feeling I don't know. Like I'm impressed with, and I'm glad that Clark is willing to speak those specific goals into existence, because this program needs people to identify themselves from the top to the bottom as winners effectively, right? Like it's hard to not, and I'm not again taking a shot at anybody or anything. It's just there was a lot of years of struggle, and and that's not just like the end of the Derek Mason era. Like you can go back decades or whatever. It's you put on the Vanderbilt jersey and you shouldn't feel like the little engine that could. Like you should put on the Vanderbilt jersey and feel like a team that can step into a stadium versus just about anybody and walk out that day victorious. You've got to play with ego and confidence to have any success. Otherwise, you got no chance. You're going to get bowled over. So the fact that Clark is instilling that in them is a really, really important piece of all of this. Like, we could sit here and talk about recruiting rankings and whatever. Some of laying the foundation is psychological. And I think Clark has done wonders for basically ripping out the studs and saying, like, going to Vanderbilt isn't a dirty word in college football. You're playing in the SEC, men. You're playing in the SEC. Own that. Wear that. You have the ability on any given Saturday to beat Kentucky, Florida, if you play to your abilities. Now, they have to continue, obviously, to develop talent on the roster. No one's like naive about that. But you still can't start it up if you don't have the belief that you already are a team that is worth competing in this league. And Clark very much believes that. That again, that's a lot of words. I feel like I'm talking like Clark, which, very long answers, very legalese.
He's coming off.
I know.
That's a good thing.
It's funny. I know enough announcers that like you talk to them and you start to go like, man, you sound like your head coach. But yeah, I think Clark is doing a good job of both understanding that they obviously have to elevate the talent, but they also have to own the fact that accepting mediocre is not good enough, because if you just accept mediocre, you're going to get mediocre, or you'll get less than mediocre. So I appreciate the way that he's like, I'm glad we went 5-7, but 5-7 is not the goal ultimately.
What are you most excited for this season? I know we have a lot to go through. You still have a baseball season to finish and the softball season to finish. But the spring game just finished, right? A couple weeks ago, or
it was when we played Missouri, so it was like a shade under a month ago.
Okay, and we're just 3 months. It feels like it's crazy, but we're like about almost 3 months away. About 3 months, a little over 3 months away from the season starting.
I mean, SEC Media Days is about 2 months from today.
Yeah,
which will put the season 3.5 months away, I guess.
Yeah,
we open up week 0 versus Hawaii. Again, like I don't necessarily know. I think there's, coming out of spring ball, the one thing that I heard the most is like the clear elevation of talent on the roster, which isn't just like one or two players. It's like in totality, the depth is clearly steady incline. So I'm curious to see that. I hear there's some, Cedric Alexander impressed, a running back for us during the spring. I think there's a good chance some of our wide receivers will have elevated seasons. Like Quincy Skinner was someone that I think they thought could make some noise last year, but dealt with some injuries that slowed him down. Jaden McGowan obviously had a very notable freshman campaign. I think he picked up SEC Player of the Week one week.
Yeah.
Freshman of the week, I should say. And there's obviously AJ Swan too in the quarterback room. I think we're going to just see a higher brand of athletic football for Vanderbilt this year. I have no earthly idea what that translates to in wins. I would love to get through the first 6 games and be bowl eligible. That would be really, really fun. I don't know that they're going to do that. That would require, I think, beating Missouri and Kentucky off the bat. But I'd love to go, 4-2 or 5-1 through that stretch and give yourself a puncher's chance down the stretch to qualify for a bowl game.
Now, if there's one game on the Vanderbilt schedule, I don't have it right in front of me at the moment, but if there's one game that you know of, either at home or away, that you think Vanderbilt fans should have marked on their own calendar or be sure to tune into or to attend, which game do you think it should be?
Anybody want to go to Vegas with us?
I would love to go to Vegas. I think that would be so much fun.
I mean, from a intrigue standpoint, I think going out to Vegas, and is that Allegiant? I think, is that Allegiant Stadium?
Yes.
Or okay. Yeah, that would be good. I think I really do think trying to get out of non-conference play 4-0 is going to be significant. I don't know that it's going to be any easy at all. Because I think we have. Are we on the road? Do we go to Wake Forest? Where do we got? I think we got 2 home against Hawaii, home against Alabama A&M. Let's see how quickly I can get there. At Wake Forest, at UNLV. It's going to be real tough. UNLV has had some coaching changes. I'd like to think that we could get out to UNLV and perform well. Wake Forest is going to be doing it with a new quarterback, but that was a really good team last year.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah. So I think if we can get through non-conference play at 4-0, I think we got a real chance to try to grab some wins. I think you start the season with only a couple of games that are truly, truly off the table for you. Not to talk exactly unlike Clark, who's going to say that every game is on the table for you, as well he should. Georgia is what Georgia is right now.
It's kind of the inevitable.
And unfortunately, the way stylistically Tennessee plays, it's just, you got to have a lot of speed in the back end. And I think we're developing our depth as we go along right now. And you got to be able to keep up with the wide receivers and find some pressure. The Tennessee game is going to be tough in Knoxville. Not to say that, something strange couldn't happen. But those games make you uncomfortable. But the rest of them are all gettable. Ole Miss, Auburn, South Carolina, all gettable. Florida, Missouri, Kentucky, all gettable. Not saying we're going to get any one of those or all of them or whatever. But if you can go 4-0 in non-conference play, yeah, I mean, the only one that makes me deeply uncomfortable saying is the Tennessee game, because I don't care whatever the matchups are. I'd like us to go out there and knock them off Rocky Top. That would be great. It'd be really, really good. I would take that 100 times out of 100. I just, stylistically, I know where our program is building and where their program has some strengths. And it's just a tough matchup. We'd have to grind the heck out of that ball game. So we'll see. But, the rest of the SEC, I think if we play up to our capabilities, we can really challenge a lot of the teams in the conference this year. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this football season, both NFL and college-wise. I mean, getting to see how Vanderbilt's going to perform, to see how Tennessee bounces back after that great year, to see how South Carolina performs after a fantastic ending to their season, and then even on the NFL side, I'm really excited to see how the Titans play. I think it's the first time I'm actually this excited for football season, both on the collegiate and the NFL level, and I'm always really excited, but it's just from an outside perspective, just kind of looking and seeing how so many programs, so many teams are kind of rebuilding and how they're going to perform, especially here in Nashville. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of storylines out there.
Oh yeah. So before we finish up, we got one last series of the season for Vandy boys. Arkansas continues to be one of the best programs in the country, and then they head to Hoover, Alabama. What are we looking at this weekend as Vanderbilt hosts Arkansas to end the season?
I think Arkansas is ranked number 2. We dropped back to number 12.
Yeah.
They're really good. They've had some injuries, as I understand it, but they have enough pieces where they've been able to go out there and challenge and get wins. I think they took 2 out of 3 versus South Carolina this past weekend. They took all 3 games from Tennessee at home. Their one slip up was on the road. They lost 2 out of 3 versus Georgia. But otherwise, they're not as flashy as Florida. They don't have a Wyatt Langford who could go 3rd overall in the draft. They don't have Paul Skeens, Dylan Cruz who could go 1-2. But do they have some really good players. So they've been really consistent and steady. Like, it feels like a weekend in which they're not going to give you much. If you're going to win the series, you're going to have to go take it. Which this team is more than capable of doing, especially the way that it has played here at home. So we'll see. We'll have to see how our pitcher's health develops over the next couple of days. Obviously Carter Holton and Hunter Owen have kind of been the 2 that we've been missing. I know that there's, optimism that at least 1 or 2 of those guys will get back for us. So we shall see, but it's going to be a real fight. And I do think this team probably needs to take 2 out of 3 to get itself back into top 8 contention. Otherwise, you're probably going to need to go to Hoover and maybe make it to the championship game or win it. I don't know, but top 8 obviously means a lot to be able to host 2 rounds of postseason play. So I would certainly expect them to come out aggressive. I mean, we came out really aggressive against, I think we played Kentucky or South Carolina. No, it was Kentucky the week after we lost to Tennessee, and we played well that weekend. We were aggressive, and we had to fight and scrap, and we picked up a walk-off on Sunday. I would expect all of those intangibles to be there this weekend.
And let's just say they pick up just 1 win this weekend. What's Hoover going to look like? What's their situation going to be there in Hoover?
I don't have the math exactly in front of me, but I think as long as we get 1, we're a top 4 in the bracket, which automatically puts you into double elimination and keeps you off of Tuesday, which is probably a good thing, again, for this team that needs some opportunities to grab a couple of wins to say, the trips to Alabama and Florida were less of who we are, and this is more of who we are. So we might need those chances. What's interesting is, like, if you flipped the schedule, everyone would say that Vanderbilt baseball is one of the hottest teams in the country, and you don't want to play the Vandy boys. But we happen to play Florida and Arkansas and an Alabama team coming off one of the strangest situations possible at the end of the season. Yeah. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're in a tailspin. Well, not really. It's just, we hit a bump, a significant bump. Like getting swept on the road is a bump. But we hit it at the back end where everyone can, like, pick and scratch at your resume all of a sudden. So we'll see. But I think, take care of business versus Middle tonight, provided the weather holds off, and then see what you can do against the Razorbacks. We took 2 out of 3 in Fayetteville last year, so we'll see what happens.
Awesome. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. This has been awesome. I love talking about baseball, love talking SEC baseball, and it's been really awesome to see what Vanderbilt's been able to do between the Vandy United program and just all the other teams, seeing men's basketball, even women's basketball, and just it's been so much fun to see Vanderbilt as a non-Vanderbilt fan, just from the outside, to see how they've grown. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're super busy, traveling everywhere. And then Vandy back to the series on the road.
Well, let's get a top 8 national seed, and that way I can stay home for a couple of weeks.
Awesome. Once again, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Make sure everyone who's listening, give Andrew a follow. What's your Twitter handle?
It's just Allegretta, Allegretta. Very, very findable on Vanderbilt's website.
Yes, please, everyone go follow Andrew, the voice of Vandy Boys, the voice of Vanderbilt football. Exciting stuff happening always at Vanderbilt these last couple of years and these last few months, it feels like. So once again, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
You're very welcome. We'll talk soon.